This is For the Better, a podcast for those working to affect change within their team, organization, or community. I'm your host, Ben Cash. Podcast where we talk with leaders and change makers from purpose-driven organizations and discuss the great things they're doing. This podcast is produced by Reason One, a full-service digital agency helping those who do good do better. My guest today is Ricky Parker, the co-founder of Shockoe Wine. Hey, Ricky.
Hey, how are you doing today?
All right. Thanks for joining us today.
No, it's a pleasure to be here.
So I learned about you through a mutual friend, Dean Browell. I was at a healthcare conference in North Carolina, and we were sort of celebrating afterwards. And Dean came up with this bottle of wine. You love wine? You got to try this wine. And he was pouring us a glass and was like, this is so good. Who made this? And he's like, my friend made it. He's got a winery in Virginia. And I'm like, I had to learn more. So we started talking about the winery and the wine. And I was like, I have to talk to Ricky. I also have a business partner who has started a vineyard. They're not really producing much wine yet, but they started a vineyard. So I am getting influenced by him. And also I lived in Virginia for 8 years near the wine country there. And so I was like, I'm so curious about so many things, and I've got to talk to Ricky. So this was inevitable.
I'm glad.
Yeah. And so what's your story? I mean, you've got an interesting background and how you came to start a winery. And I just wondered if you could just sort of take us back. Tell us how you got here.
Yeah, no, I definitely can do that. First, I have to give a shout out to Dean. He's definitely our official Shockoe Wine ambassador. And so I definitely appreciate his advocacy and just all he's been doing just for the brand and introducing it to new people. But for me, my background in the wine and spirit space really kind of dates back, I want to say maybe 12, 13 years ago.
Okay.
Like right after I was leaving undergrad, finishing at Virginia Union University, I entered into the entertainment field. And while I was working in entertainment, it was a mixture of me being in nightlife, me working in music. I stumbled across the role working with Moet Hennessy Louis Vuitton as a brand ambassador, influencer for a couple of products under their portfolio. Initially, I started working with some Hennessy branded products. From that, it grew to like a role with Belvedere Vodka. From that, it grew to doing some ad hoc work with Moet Chandon. And this was initially my introduction to like the wine and spirit space. And so this is all around, I think, between the time frame of like 2009, 2010 of like me really getting my entry into the space. And as I'm getting the entry into the space, I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. And so there's everything from a grassroots marketing perspective. I had the responsibility for just working with these brands of figuring out, even when it came to like new flavor offerings, like how do we bring that to market, or how do we work with the distributor to figure out some deals where like we can kind of get bar managers to really buy into this new product, or even working with bar managers to figure out how do we get cocktails or figure out other specials. And so it was really me learning a lot of the logistics, or a lot of we really went into like the behind the scenes. I think we think about food and beverage, but really on this beverage side of it, just really understanding that. From there, we're working with LVMH. I transitioned to started working with Campari, really like with Sky Spirits. While I was working with Sky, I was primarily working on a new acquisition they had. It was a liqueur called X-Rated Fusion.
Okay.
It was a liqueur that they acquired from Diageo, and they were going through a rebrand and trying to figure out how to position it in market. And so like with my experience, I was seeing a lot of different things from taking, uh, traditional household, brands like a Belvedere and figuring out, how do we, position this more in market to even you think of something like a novelty brand like a Liqueur and figuring out, how do we position this? So it kind of gave me a good range or understanding about just it really came down to like story or it really came down to you understanding your consumer and
Yeah.
just a lot of times I started to see even with the liqueur, it wasn't just how do we have to sell this more product, but how can this be coupled into something else? So this whole idea of cocktails or partnerships or what
Right.
is something else that people are already leaning towards where we can pair this with something that is familiar or people will be open to it. So at the foundation, a lot of this like, 12, 13 years in the making where I really have to reference these early years in my career of doing this brand ambassador influencer work. And with that, I really loved it. I really had a great understanding, or even in the programs I was in. I think what I was able to just do for the DC market, it was something that I was able to like effectively help position these brands.
Yeah.
From there, just like fast forward, and I think like a lot of different creatives within like the marketing advertising space. I went into a lot of different industries. Doing some work in healthcare to even working with nonprofits to eventually ending up in higher education, teaching at Virginia Union and Virginia Commonwealth to even around, I would probably say like 2017, 2018 is really when I started to get another nudge just about like wine and spirits. My
Yeah.
mentor, Kenny Burns, became a part owner of Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey.
Okay.
So Uncle Nearest it's an American whiskey brand. Right now is the fastest growing independent whiskey brand in American history.
Oh, wow.
And so in it, like their story pays homage. The brand like pays homage to the story of Nearest Green. He was a black man that taught Jack Daniels how to distill whiskey, and he was the first master distiller for Jack Daniels.
Oh,
And
wow.
so with when this brand launched, just me being natural, just kind of already understanding or knowing some things, just assisting my mentor, just even with this venture was something I was doing initially in the DC market, and that transitioned to when the brand got distribution in Virginia, understanding like how can we or how could I help position the brand in Central Virginia when we think about like the Richmond, Tidewater area and from there, this is really kind of, sparked another a bug, in me where just kind of thinking about ownership or just really kind of thinking about this idea of, how I've always wanted to have my own, wine or spirit brand. And I think around like 2019, it really started like this research phase I was getting into where earlier on in 2019, I started to think about this idea of a wine label was always on like my bucket list of like big things I want to make happen or I want to get done. And so
Right.
I started just doing research, just about winemaking in Virginia, the Virginia wine region. Even started having some dialogues with some friends I had within the food and beverage space. Just getting the idea of like, all right, let me just educate myself. The fact that I see this as something I would want to do down the line. Like, let me start doing the homework. Then it even came down to like during 2019, I had this idea to do a friends and family limited run of some wine, where I was kind of figuring out like, all right, maybe I could do like a small run of something as a friends and family gift. And I was planning it out to kind of coincide my 36th birthday in 2020. And so I was
Yeah.
doing this planning in 2019 for it. And as I was doing this planning, we started going to 2020 and COVID hit. And as COVID started to hit, me and two of my friends Chris Randolph and Steve Johnson III, we started to connect. Initially, Chris was the glue between the three of us, where Steve and I both had our own relationships with Chris, but Chris felt at the beginning of the pandemic we had a lot of mutual background, within hospitality and food and beverage that, hey, the three of us need to be talking, or we need to figure out, if there's something we could do together. And so just with the pandemic, everyone having time in their hands, we're like, hey,
Yeah.
let's just do a Zoom once a week, just kind of touch in, to kind of, or, every other week just to see,
Yeah.
what ideas we have or what are our interests or what we're seeing. And I remember one meeting I brought up, it's an update of what I was working on with this wine project. Like I'm doing this wine project, getting close to kind of like really starting to like really get the ball rolling or get started with it. And I was just explaining it to them. They were intrigued. They were like, hold on. So like, are you selling the wine? I was like, well, to sell it, it's a whole nother process where like I don't think I have the bandwidth to kind of do everything that's needed on the operation side to make sure it's there. So Chris and Steve was like, hey, let's figure it out. Or, the fact you're saying you're already in contact, with somebody who's willing to kind of, help with this or, kind of assist with the production. Let's figure out what we could do. And so from there, the three of us, we sat down with George Hassan, the CEO of Veritas, where initially the conversation with Veritas was a small, friends and family custom crush project where it's something me kind of using as a positioning piece to just kind of do something to kind of slowly enter the space and kind of show like, hey, I have interest in being into the space to us really having a conversation just about what we thought about a brand. And, just when we presented the idea of Shockoe Wine. And for us, like even when we came down to the name, we really just kind of thought about two things. The first really went into this idea of like brand equity. And so my partner, Chris, he formerly owned a restaurant in Shockoe Bottom called Shockoe Whiskey and Wine. And like prior to even me and Chris meeting or, having a rapport, I always just thought the branding for the restaurant was like great. I thought like it was very clean. It definitely was a staple, for young professionals in Richmond, just when it came to the weekend where like, I felt like the brand equity or like the life that brand had is still existed where, the fact that your name has Shockoe Wine already attached, like maybe this needs to be the name. And as we did deeper, it was just between the three of us, we all had our own personal connections to Shockoe. For me, I'm an alumnus of Virginia Union University. And Virginia Union was founded in a slave jail, in Shockoe Bottom.
Wow.
And so this has all happened after the Civil War. And so for me, it was this connotation of like, I see the story we could tell with Shockoe, even for Chris, like with him having a restaurant in Shockoe Bottom previously. But even prior to that, his father and his grandfather both used to come to sell crops at the farmer's market in Shockoe Bottom. Or even my partner, Steve, how he's a account director for the Martin Agency and their headquarters in Shockoe. And so like we just kind of all felt outside of the historical significance for Shockoe Bottom and being
and can you actually just to give listeners some context here, what's the story of Shockoe Bottom?
Sure, yeah, I was just about to get to that. So like I think when you think about the historical context of it, Shockoe Bottom is this neighborhood in Richmond, Virginia. But historically, during the 1800s, it was the second prominent slave trading corridor outside of New Orleans. And so, with it, when you think about Black history or African American history, I feel like this location is very prominent in like telling those stories or really explaining like a lot of origin that we think about in this country. And so for us, it was a whole thing of thinking about how do we change the connotation, with this story? Because sometimes I think when people hear, Shockoe Bottom, they automatically go to this idea of slavery or what the beginning was. And for us, we wanted it to be two-sided, educational, but also something like how can we allow the term Shockoe to be something celebratory? How can
Mm.
we change this to be something that you hear the term Shockoe, now you're thinking this idea of inclusion. And so like even for us as a brand, like our pillars that like they really guide a lot of our decision making are inclusion, education, and community. So this idea of inclusion, like one of our mottos is creating our own table. And like with creating our own table, we
I
feel
love
like
that.
everyone's invited. And with that, that's how we're just very big on this inclusive piece where it's not a one-sided story, and it, with Shockoe, we wanted to kind of be celebratory for everyone where even for me, I believe like American history is all tied together. It's not these pockets for this one group of people, this other group of people,
Right.
but this is all of our history. And so even as we were just thinking about a lot of this stuff, I feel like we think about food and beverage or this whole idea of wine, it becomes a very conversational like thing. Where like when you drink wine, it opens up a lot of dialogues for a lot of things you may like normally talk about, or you may not normally
Right.
engaging in. And so it was us just kind of thinking about like how do we position some things that normally, people are afraid of, or people are kind of shying away from. Where I know even we think about inclusion, even think about like the hospitality space. When we think about representation of like, BIPOC individuals or, people who identify, as queer or, non-binary, where it's just like, how do we make sure like even in these spaces, people have a voice? So what does that look like? And so I think that kind of falls into this idea of community where, we've constantly been on uh, an intentional journey of really making sure people are involved where it's not one-sided. And so even on a community standpoint, I know last Labor Day, we were able to partner with an organization called Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, the Richmond alumni chapter. And we were able to do a jazz fundraiser. We raised $8,000 for scholarships for Richmond high school students,
Wonderful.
college. And so for us, it's kind of like multi-sided, where it's just like, how can we use wine as a vehicle, to make impact? And
Yeah.
it gets to this education piece where I think for us, education is two-sided. It's like, how can we provide access to information for people where that could be even just about wine, because I think a lot of times if you think about wine or even like us starting with a red blend, it could be very polarizing to someone who like, I'm not a wine drinker, but
Right.
like if I have an education of what I'm drinking or what I'm consuming, I'm more open to it. But then the other side of it is just even thinking about this whole thing of this equity, and access, like how can we make sure just as a brand, we're like the fact we're not a nonprofit, but like how can we advocate for things that need to be happening? Even like right now, where I know me and my partners we're having like a whole conversation about what more can we do to advocate for Richmond Public School. And it's like from a standpoint, like we're a for-profit brand, but it's understanding like how can we use our voice of positioning to mobilize people around other causes that may not directly, benefit us, but the fact that we're in this position and we have, I think, this responsibility corporately, as an organization,
Yeah.
like, we kind of have to take a stand or really be committed to doing what we say we're going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so, I think my last podcast interview, I was talking with someone, Eric Henry in North Carolina, who was one of the first B Corps in the state.
Oh, wow.
And it's something that we're in the application process ourselves. And this notion of using your business as a force for good is something that's so important nowadays. And because I think, as we see, government is very slow to change and to change things and make an impact. And I applaud you for seeing your business as that vehicle and your wine as that vehicle to bring people to the table. How have you, with that mindset of seeing the business as more than just selling a product, how do you balance that? Right, that's something that we struggle with. Is you've got to build a good product. Right? Yeah. You got to do that because you got to have a successful business and profit to fuel these initiatives and fuel the scholarships and things. But how have you balanced that?
I think it's really having a great team. Like I said, I've gotten a lot better with this since we've been in like a business, or I think over the last year of us really being in market. Like I'm the one partner initially. I was just so full of people. Like, let's do this. Let's give this money. Let's give this away. Like, I was just so. I'm always focused on like a give back component, but I think starting out, I was always overly communicating about like what is our positioning in this. Like, let's not just start and we get popping or like we're successful and then it's something like a year or 2 years from now we're trying to figure out or explain to people what our corporate, social responsibility, positioning or plan is, where it's like, let's figure this out from the jump. But I think, and I would just say having a great team. I have one partner who's he's very anal just about like numbers. And so if it doesn't make sense number wise, like you always communicate, yeah, it's great, but like this ain't adding up when we think about like the bottom line of what we're doing.
I have some colleagues like that too.
I think it's great because in it, it balances everything out. Where I think from a standpoint, a lot of times, even with the wine venture, like I'm vision casting, I'm like explaining where I think we should go to what needs to happen, and then sometimes I think one partner is like, nah, let's bring it back in. We got to kind of slow it down. I'm not saying we can't do this, but we got to look at the bottom line. We're in this to make money, or we're in this to like where we can sustain this, and this can become really our main thing, or this is the thing we're living off of. And so I think it's a balance of those personalities and those conversations where it's not all one thing, but I think it's that constantly coming to that common ground, because I think everyone in your organization isn't always going to be able to flip back and forth from like, oh, let me be super creative, now let me be analytical. Where I think there's those moments, I think, where they both meet. For some of us, we're like, oh, I'm forced to kind of have to use both sides. But I think a lot of times you have some people like, oh, all I got to focus on is like the administrative, the analytical side of what we're doing. I can do that. And like you focus on the creative, or you focus on like sales and all this, where I think, having those roles or having this key positioning about who's doing what, I think is very important, because I think it alleviates a lot of the ambiguity with it, where even for us, like being like a three-man team, where I think we're able to get a lot done, just off of like how we're able to over communicate or really being honest about what we can and can't do. Yeah. And like I think it level set our expectations with each other, or just overall about what we're doing, because there's a very clear understanding of like everyone's level of effort, or what everyone really can give, or also just everyone's skill set. So I think when you have a good understanding of that, I think this is the idea of like having the right people on the bus and having the And I think for us, even though like we don't have a lot of people on the bus, the seats we got in, we kind of figured out like, all right, how can I sit in like 2 or 3 seats? How can you sit in 2 or 3 seats? Yeah. How can we constantly have this middle ground of us, having these objectives, or these are goals that we're working towards, but just constantly having something that's guiding us, where it's not like we're shooting from the hip.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And um, I couldn't agree more on having the right combination of partners and people around you. Because it sounds like you have a real vision for Shockoe and for what you want to be as a winery, as a community, member, as and as a force for good. But you also need those people who are going to ground you in reality, because you got to have a business as your platform if you're going to make that impact. And if you don't have that platform, it's that much more difficult. Tip of the hat to the people that ground us out there and that help make change possible and don't let us get over our skis, right? So I'm curious about the actual wine itself. So you mentioned that you partnered with Veritas for some logistical things to kind of get it going, which is so smart, right? When you're trying to get off the ground with something new, to create partnerships with those who have been there before. And so I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about getting off the ground and that the process of making the wine from idea to that first smile and that your first customer had when they drank it. Because I tell you that stuff is so good.
Thank you again, just for even your feedback about the wine. For us, starting out, we knew we wanted to start with red. Like we knew like that was a category we wanted to kind of start our positioning with. We were very leery of starting off with something like a rosé. Like we didn't want to come off too trendy or just something that was like just in the moment. And so with knowing we wanted to do a red, us exploring the idea of a red blend was really like the foundation of what we were looking at. And so with the relationship we have with Veritas, what we have is custom press relationship where we're sourcing their grapes. Like these are grapes that they actually harvest, and we're sourcing it. But in the process with the winemaking, we have had the ability to be hands-on, just in like the barrel making or just even the selection of barrels we're using for the wine.
So they're providing the support, but you're ultimately making the decisions.
Yeah, we're also making the decisions. Like what barrel we're going to use, or even describing like the profile we wanted. Where for us, it wasn't too lengthy of a process. It was almost like the second barrel option we went with, but we felt like, oh no, this definitely fits. And I think for us, it was a thing of we wanted to have an offering that really would solidify us with wine enthusiasts. And so, kind of thinking about the popularity of like Virginia wine country. We wanted something that like wine wise, it could be positioned in these conversations about a great Virginia red wine. And so that was like our initial goal when we were thinking about like our first offering. Like, how can this be something where if you're a wine drinker, you're like, this is amazing wine, but even if you're not a wine drinker, you're like, oh wow, this is good. Where that was always like our focal point starting. And like working with Veritas has definitely been a great process, and just learning the logistical side of the production piece, how it works. And with it, it's kind of worked out great because and we've been able to kind of be very hands-on with the creative aspect. We've even like designing our labels with all that, where it's definitely like a partnership all together where it's definitely hand in hand, like getting everything done. And so I just appreciate their support where I just think about coming to market, or you think about wine. One of the things I was just thinking about with the limitations we had is just how can we really work with somebody who is respected, in this field for doing what they do, or, they're experts at this, So I think for us over the last year, it's definitely been a learning process where for us as a brand, the whole goal is to grow. even more. Or even this year, we have plans of releasing some other varieties,
Wonderful.
like a Riesling, rosé, uh, you know, a sparkling rosé, sweet red. So just really
Wonderful.
expanding our portfolio a little bit more. But with that, it's also been a process of us really understanding the process that really goes into the winemaking. And so for us, is even this whole thing of of working to position ourselves to having a tasting room, or even to
Yeah.
this whole thing of you know, even having a farm winery. It's a lot of
Yeah.
different dialogues where I think uh, the direction we've taken is allow us to focus at this point of building the brand equity, where I feel like now we're at this place where even we're under a year, but we've made a lot of traction where I feel like it makes sense for us at this point that, we could position ourselves to go around doing like a round of funding or seed funding,
Yeah.
like, for a tasting room or for a farm winery, where this isn't us coming out the gate where there's no proof of concept of like, oh, you want to do a winery, but you need,
Well, you have your wine is a strong anchor for that, right? And I think
yeah,
it's hard to build something on shaky
yeah,
foundation. And I think if I recall the when you first released that wine, it sold out within 4 months.
yeah, it sold
Um,
out in 4 months, and we had to go to our reserve barrels after that. So in it's been this constant thing I think that kind of works in our favor with even the sales history, even us now being like 3 Wegman locations within the state of Virginia. Um, just even this whole thing of even us having plans now to like grow our portfolio where we kind of see equity wise, when we think about like brand equity or like the worth of this, like there's value in this intangible where if we didn't do all this work or we started like, oh yeah, before we start anything, we need to raise the money to have a farm where like we can actually build a
right.
winery, where I think us taking this approach has allowed us to build this brand recognition or this brand awareness. Now when people see it, like, oh, I see what you guys are
Yeah.
doing. I see what you stand for. I see it's not just about the wine, but there is a give back component, or there is this
Yeah.
community component, or there's this component that you're attaching this to history or other things than just wine. They're like,
Right.
man, I'm interested in, or I can kind of see the value of investing. And so I think like with me and all my partners, we all see this growing as like an international brand,
Right.
and I'm just really excited. I feel like this is like one of the things I'm probably most proud of, just like the whole idea of just having this come into fruition, and just what we've been able to do just in our first year, just even the
It's
press we able to do.
it's pretty impressive. And just from the story you're telling, it feels like you have the right partners, both in your business partners, as well as your production partners, and but what I'm impressed about, and I think why I know you're going to be successful, is because of that the impact you're looking to make,
Yeah.
and the way that you care about your community is not a marketing tactic. It's not
Yeah,
just a way to,
yeah,
it is part of who you are, right? And I think that authenticity is what consumers are expecting now, right? And if you are walking the walk, and there's a story that you're telling and you're making an impact, and people feel like they share your beliefs,
yeah.
there is no ad slogan or campaign you can make that will that will rival that. And
I agree.
it's so refreshing to see that you mean what there's meaning behind what you're doing. um and I'm excited for you. I really am. It's
Thank you so
yeah.
much.
Yeah. um we're getting close to time here, but I do want to I'm curious about the educational mission that you've sort of alluded to. It sounds like there's both educational or educating people about Shockoe's history and transforming that, but also, you have an educational background, and I know there's an educational community education component to this. So can you share a little bit about, how education plays into the mission of Shockoe Wine?
Well, I think just from a marketing standpoint, one of the ways consumers are really inclined to buy products is education. And so, like, a lot of times we don't think about it like that, where I think the more you educate someone on a product, they're more inclined to understand the benefits or like why this, can add value to their life.
Yeah.
So one of the things we've been able to do on the experience side is create virtual and in-person tasting. And so with that has been a piece where like we've been able to educate people just about the wine. So with it, we take an audience through a guided tasting, and with it, we really break down, our 2019 red band vintage, and with that, we break down, the body of it, how it's made up of part Petit Verdot, part Merlot, part Cabernet Franc, to even the process of how it was aged in oak barrels, to like the type of grapes, to even allowing people to understand Petit Verdot is like a signature grape in Virginia, where like when we really think about this wine, that's the grape that kind of really is bringing everything together and really giving in this body.
And can I ask you, so sorry to interrupt you, I'm curious. So you mentioned the virtual component, because that's one of the reasons I also reached out to you initially. Was we do some virtual events and where we will send out bottles to people and create kind of like, we all get on Zoom and we all partake and whatnot. And changing so much during the pandemic. And you were talking about how you were, like maybe creating a farm experience and people coming to an actual tasting room, that kind of thing. That's a pretty big shift. So how is virtual going to play into your strategy in the future? Is it?
Oh, no, it works. So I feel like experience is our competitive advantage. I think over any other wine label, I think especially in Virginia, where I think we look at wine labels in Virginia is more of a destination thing, where it's about you visiting my winery or you driving into like the mountains to come to a destination. For us, it's more experience based. We're outside of our tastings. We're like, we've done tastings virtual, like just like how you explained, where we'll ship the bottles out or even in person. But something else we've been doing over the last year, we've been doing these private art mixers. We've been like DC and Richmond, like back and forth. But like with these art mixers, it's giving us an opportunity similar to the tastings, but it's a lot more informal, of inviting the audience, allowing them to try the wine, allow them the opportunity to meet us, where we can kind of talk to them, educate them about the product, but then driving the traffic and telling them, hey, if you really want to purchase, you can go to our website and make a purchase. So, which, by the way, is
ShockoeWine.com, right? So if anybody's thirsty, they want to taste this awesome red, go to ShockoeWine.com. I got to promote that.
And so I think for us, like experience is kind of, it's a thing we've taken advantage of. And so I think with us having a tasting room or us actually having like actual winery, it'll give us more position to kind of just scale when we think about the experience aspect of it. Yeah. And so I think that's the great part about it, where between me, Chris, and Steve, we all have our own collective experience when it comes to like event planning, event management, outside of just like this hospitality piece. So like we all get this, where we've kind of seen that like this has been a piece that like really makes the impact of, when we do an art mixer, just the days after that, or just that day to like even after that, like what our sales looks like, or if we do multiple tasting, like how that like that becomes a bulk order of a bunch of wine that's moving at one time, or just even in that, how that becomes an opportunity where somebody may got a bottle in the tasting, but now wants to order another bottle just after it. So we've kind of just seen how that's something that everyone's not doing, but it
Right.
becomes a piece of allowing people to really have a good understanding about our brand versus I think another strategy we've had, we've been very strategic about controlling our supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, like a lot of our logistics we handle ourselves, from like even shipping, like website orders, we handle that. Even for like distribution in Virginia, like we work with a distributor, but a lot of that stuff is like we're hands on with them and like fulfilling the orders. And so for us, one of the things we didn't want to do, we have like a lot of relationships in Virginia with a lot of different outlets like restaurant, retail, but we didn't want to grow too fast and be in too many locations too fast, but
Right.
like lose sight of really controlling who our audience is, where the
Smart.
demand is, versus like, all right, let's have this more control. Where it's like, all right, let's focus on Wegmans. Like we can focus
Yeah.
on Wegmans. It gives us a good piece of saying we can drive traffic to one place, or if this starts to work on their own and they're working it, we can kind of gauge where this is going versus we're in 5 different restaurants. We're trying to tell people to go, but the wine is really only selling at one restaurant. But it gets into this murky place where I think for us it's just us having the data or us realizing like data is really helping us make calculated decisions has really been helping us. And so I think for us it's just been very strategic in our planning of not moving too fast, but also
Yeah.
just looking at what is happening or where the people at that we're interacting with. Because even one of the things we're doing now, like we've been doing these art mixers in DC and Richmond, but we're starting to think like, all right, we're getting some sales in New York. Maybe we need to go to New York. Or maybe need to like figure out one for Atlanta or Chicago or LA. And so it's us just starting to think bigger on a national level. Because even like we're shipping to a lot of these states, but like a lot of our initial interactions really just been in the region of us, like focusing on DC and Richmond. And so in it is like strategically, just really allowing the data to guide
Yeah.
everything.
I think that's really smart. It sounds like you're building your network, you're building your community, and that community is where you can further your education efforts and sort of you got to build that community first. Though it's sounds like you're doing a lot of great things to create those connections.
No,
Um,
thank you. Appreciate it.
so we're at time here, but I do want to ask just one last question here. What voices do you listen to or follow that we should or that we can learn from?
Les Brown. Les
Brown, who's
Brown is someone I listen to a lot. I feel like he's a phenomenal speaker, and
okay.
he always challenges me just with my perspective of how I'm looking at things.
Well, Les Brown. Yeah, where would we find Les Brown?
Uh,
Just
all over.
Google.
Like he's a renowned speaker. Like even if you Google, I know some stuff will come up on YouTube. He even has like some audio albums on like Apple Music, Spotify, where
Okay. Okay.
there's a good range of it. But I think the content and the subject matter, it definitely gets to this idea of awareness or
Yeah.
even like mindfulness of just really understanding like, what do you want or where are you going? And I think it kind of really checks this whole idea of not having a passive approach with life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a great point to bring this to a close. Ricky, thank you so much for talking with me. I've learned so much, and your story is it's exciting because as a fellow entrepreneur, I just to see the trajectory that you're describing and the relationships you're creating and the success you're having, it's really It's really great. And I wish you all the success in the future. And I'm sure we'll talk again. And we're definitely going to take you up on some of those virtual events. Yeah. And so ShockoeWine.com, if you want to order some of Ricky's amazing wine, or if you want to learn more about Shockoe Winery and Shockoe Bottom and their story, check them out. ShockoeWine.com.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much. Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye. This has been an episode of For the Better. For more information, episodes, or to be a guest on the podcast, visit forthebetterpodcast.com. Thanks all. Be well.